Samuel, are you surprised that the country is still so divided on race relations?
I mean, I think one thing you learn when you're in government is when you're presented with data, you want to look behind to see, what lies within it. So actually, it is quite concerning to hear that half the population think that the country is divided. But actually, if you were to break that down by ethnic group, but also where people are based geographically, so people based in major cities versus those who are based in more rural settings, you're probably going to see that there are variances. And I think there are two parts to that. One is actually, to what extent do you engage with people who are from different backgrounds to yourself regularly? And another is, of course, where you based geographically. And actually, there's probably one more thing I would say, where do you work? What kind of social background do you have? So I think there is probably a mixed picture underneath that very concerning piece of data.
Now, the negative result for Theresa May, I imagine, stems from the attacks that she faced over Windrush. You worked for her. You worked for Boris Johnson. I mean, do you think she was in any way less committed, though, to the racial equality agenda? I mean, my impression was she was very committed to it.
First, I didn't work for her. I was on her race disparity advisory board,
yeah, that's what I meant,
so it wasn't a full-time job.
Yeah.
And what I would say is actually the Conservative Party has been on a journey when it comes to engaging with the subject of race relations, right? So it went from not talking about it for decades to actually, David Cameron and his modernisation agenda, choosing to reach out to new communities. Under Theresa May, I think she genuinely did want to continue to engage with that subject. Now, one of the things that was quite compelling for me, and one of the reasons why I went to join Boris Johnson's team, is because I felt like actually we weren't really trying to carve out an offer that is what I call distinctively ours, one that focuses on hope, aspiration, agency. And I really think that if you were to have a poll and you strip back the colours of the various parties and you just focused on values and policies, you'd find that there are people who are black and Asian, minority ethnic, who actually are probably more closely aligned to the Conservative Party than they currently think.
Now, in your resignation letter, you talked about there being too little empathy in Downing Street. What did you mean by that?
I mean, I wouldn't say just Downing Street specifically. I think the hustle and bustle of politics means that very often people focus on the next election. And I think that actually people get involved in politics for different reasons, but what should be the most important focus is how you improve outcomes for the lives of people in this country. And I think very often when you're stuck in the middle of power and you're dealing with things like responding to pandemics, etc., that sometimes you might not pause and reflect on what is the right thing to do.
I mean, you were frustrated, you did resign. Talk us through why you felt that was the right thing to do.
I mean, to be honest, I had a great time working with world-class civil servants, fantastic special advisors.
But there must be a but.
Yeah, I mean, a time did come when I felt like tensions were increasing, and eventually I felt like the best thing for me to do was to leave.
And was it because the racial disparity report in the end didn't capture the values you wanted to see captured?
No. I have to be honest with you, Robert, the main reason why I agreed to come on this interview was because sitting on this chair was on my bucket list.
It's great to have you.
I have no intention of throwing any of my former colleagues on the bus.
No, that wasn't what I was looking at. But this is an important issue. You wrote a resignation letter which showed that you were frustrated, and all I'm trying to do is, people want to understand what the frustrations were. I'm not asking you to personalise it or to attack individuals, but just to give me a sense of why you felt ultimately you couldn't advance your agenda.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, there were a number of tensions. And in terms of the report you mentioned, early in the year, I actually stepped away from being directly involved in it, and I did resign before the publication came out. So
it came out. It was roughly the same time.
Yeah, so there was not a direct correlation, so to speak.
But again, as I say, I'm not trying to sort of embarrass you, but just try to get it. I think people just wanted to understand, because it was such an important role you were playing, why you felt there was no more work of benefit that you could do in that job. Yeah,
I mean, as I say, the reality is there are colleagues of mine who don't have a right of reply, so it'd be very difficult for me to say anything without them being able to respond or defend themselves.
And invite them on the programme.
Yeah, I'm sure once they leave, they'll be more than happy to also try to...
But tell me, but I do know, because you have spoken about this publicly, that you are concerned about what some people call culture wars and the way that the government periodically exploits it. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, the very nature of a culture war is having two or more groups deeply entrenched in their ideological views and being quite unwilling to cede ground. And actually, why a culture war is quite dangerous, or why it's dangerous for a government to engage in a culture war, is because sometimes one group is correct, sometimes the other group is correct in their perspective. Sometimes they're both correct and sometimes they're both wrong. And the challenge is, and sometimes, of course, the answer is somewhere in the middle, that thing we call nuance. And the challenge with a government participating in a culture war is that it means that they don't leave room for nuance, and they don't leave room to do what ultimately they should be doing, which is acting in the national interest and working for all the citizens.
And, I mean, you plainly believe, you've said, that there are people in this government exploiting culture wars. What did you have in mind?
Well, I think there are people in government and outside of government as well who believe that actually the best way to have electoral success in the short to medium term is to actively participate in a culture war. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. And I actually think the culture war we're experiencing today is actually the symptom of a cause. If you look at the history of this country, governments after governments have failed to find a way to make sure that we can properly integrate new arrivals from 1948 all the way to 2021. And I think that actually what government should be doing is trying to find a way to inspire a joint, unified narrative that brings people together and gives everybody that sense of pride of place. But
so one of the things that I found surprising is when, for example, just a few days ago, the question was put to Boris Johnson about people booing footballers who take the knee. He would not criticise the booers. He said he would prefer that people cheered the England team, but he refused to say that booing was wrong. Why do you think that is?
I think the challenge we have is, as I say, there is this culture war, and people often feel like they have to take a side.
But isn't it important to take a side against people who boo people who are simply exercising their consciences to make a very important point?
Yeah, totally. In my view, I think people are more than entitled to have perspectives on whether or not England players should take the knee. I've seen people speak very eloquently about why they believe it's not the right way to demonstrate your commitment to racial equality and tackling racism. But what is fundamentally wrong is for you to boo people who are representing your country because you don't believe in how they are peacefully protesting. And I do think that we need to get to a point where politicians are able to rise above this cultural movement and hopefully say the right things at the right time, not just thinking about polls or what the next election may bring forth.
And do you think this might partly explain something which is quite striking to me, which is this cabinet is the most ethnically diverse I think we've ever seen in British history. And yet, as Anushka pointed out, people from ethnic minority backgrounds trust Labour still massively more than they trust the Conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a history that speaks to this, but also relationship matters. Like, if you want to build trust, people need to know that you have their best interests at heart. And also, actually, ethnic representation is very important. It's very important for people to see role models or people that they can aspire to become. But the reality is that that is not going to be the only thing that helps to improve outcomes for people. You need to be empathetic. You need to have relationships. You need to understand place and all the other challenges that people might be experiencing based on a number of different factors.
Samuel, it's been so nice to have you on the show. I'm hoping that it wasn't a one-off bucket list thing and you'll come back another time.